And great pleasure right now to have joining us on the Book Talk segment of the show, a woman who has written a really interesting book that is called Island Practice, Cobblestone Rash, Underground Tom, and Other Adventures of a Nantucket Doctor. We're joined today by a New York Times health writer, and congratulations on her first book. Pam Belluck joined us by telephone. How are you, Pam?
Oh, I'm fine. Thanks so much, Doug.
Good to have a chance to talk to you. Yeah, and as you were talking before we went on, your first book, so a great debut. I enjoyed it.
Oh, well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
As being a health writer for the Times for a while, I kind of know what drew you to the topic, but how did you get the information about this is a man called Dr. Timothy Leppery, Nantucket's really main doctor, isn't it?
Yeah. He is the go-to guy. He's the only surgeon. He's the medical examiner. He's the football team doctor. He is a tick disease expert. He picks up your animals. He has a somewhat unorthodox, unofficial role as a psychologist. Pretty much anything you would want, medical or otherwise. he's the guy to see. I actually found him before I was health and science reporter for the Times. I was based up in New England at the time, New England bureau chief, and we were just kind of asked to find somebody who was doing something interesting in an interesting place for an occasional series of profiles that the national editors wanted all the bureau chiefs to do, and I just kind of noticed his name, just one little line about him being the only surgeon on Nantucket in an alumni newsletter from Tufts Medical School, one of gazillions of pieces of paper that crossed my desk, and I was actually debating between calling him and the guy who ran a nude bowling league in Maine.
There's a book.
Right. It's hard to show pictures, then there was some guy in Vermont who was trying to make Vermont into its own country.
I've heard about that. Yeah.
But I called up Dr. Leppery. Of course, I thought he was Dr. Lepore because that's how his name is spelled. And we just had such an interesting conversation on the phone. I went and spent a few days there, wrote a piece for the New York Times, and some people in the book industry called and said, we think there's a book here. And I really wasn't sure exactly what I would find, but it's been so fascinating over the last few years as I've kind of followed him. Every time, literally, even now, every time I visit or talk with him, there's something else that is interesting, either about the case that he's handling or something odd that's happened on the island. It seems to attract a bunch of kind of eccentric and independent-spirited people, and they all kind of collide there, and odd things happen. And I was just there visiting him a couple of weeks ago, and he has a new odd hobby, which is collecting rabbit skulls. Everybody, and he always has a reason. There's some scientific question that he wants to answer, but there were these skulls kind of sitting in a really fragrant barrel of some kind of liquid, probably formaldehyde or something, in his backyard. And there you go. So it's just been one of these things that has continually been interesting, and I've never gotten bored of the material. And people keep asking if there's a sequel, and I'm like, well, I kind of keep getting enough to at least add to the existing version.
Now, was he initially reluctant to have a book about him, or he didn't mind, or what was his original thought?
He has been a wonderful subject, and as a journalist, I've been doing this for I think 17 years at the Times, a few years in some other places. You always are trying to evaluate, especially when you're writing out somebody. You look for certain things that give you a sense of whether your subject is the real deal, whether they're trying to spin you in one way or another, whether they're trying to, sanitize things or keep information from you. And I have to say that Dr. Lepre has been just a terrific subject because he was always open to, my hanging out and following him around. He answered, all of my questions, and there were lots and lots and lots of questions, and I kept following up with him on X, Y, or Z. But he never tried to steer me in one direction or another. There's a lot in the book that is very personal about his family life,
right.
About tension in his family life. I think he comes off, of course, as a very dedicated and highly valued doctor, but he's a very unusual person. You get a sense of his rather unorthodox, child-rearing philosophy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You get a sense of the trouble that, one of his kids got into with drugs and the law. It is far from a, glossed over portrayal, and it was so interesting that, and he had no idea really what to expect, I think, and I had, sent him kind of an advanced copy of the book, and it's, kind of an early copy, but really pretty close to what it actually looks like now. And I was waiting for a week or two for him to read it and sitting there on tenterhooks, thinking, is he going to say, oh, you can't put that in about my father disinheriting me, or you can't put that in about, all the trouble, my son Nick got into. But I have to say there was only one thing that he looked at and asked to be, sort of augmented or added to about him. And that was one of his, there's a chapter that deals with all of his sort of obsessions and hobbies. And it mentions that he would box, and that he's a terrible boxer. There's a quote from, I think, his brother-in-law saying, something like he couldn't break a neck. He was just a terrible boxer. And he said, well, that's fine. Okay, you can leave that in. But I want it known that I was the heavyweight champion in my age class, 67, at the Nantucket Boys and Girls Club. I said, really? You want that in there? Isn't that like being the tallest building in Wichita or something? He said, no. He said, I was beating up people in wheelchairs. I was about to take on folks at the nursing home. So I was like, okay, that's in there. But as with so many things that happen in my experience talking with him, even in just telling that little story, it expresses something about him and his personality, and is just another little kind of delightful thing to include. So no, it's been a very rewarding experience because I think we've had a good relationship of kind of mutual respect for the different jobs that we do.
Well, it kind of fits in with Nantucket itself. I've never been there. I've heard a little bit about it, but just reading your book, it is kind of an unusual place filled with very unusual people, and I guess he fits right in with that, right?
Yeah, it seems to be, there's a spectrum. He's definitely, on maybe one end of the spectrum, but not nearly as odd as, some of the characters that are drawn there. It's interesting. I think it's, and I think one of the things that fascinated me too is that people don't. This is sort of a hidden side of it that most people don't know about. Even people who visit there for the summer, we tend to think of it as kind of glitzy place for wealthy, hedge fund managers and celebrities,
right.
And politicians, and all of that is true. I mean, Joe Biden spends Thanksgiving there. The Kennedy relatives, Kennedy's sail there. Jimmy Buffett crashed his seaplane there, and Dr. Lepre picked him up. You certainly do, and it does have the highest median home value of any place in the country. It's very expensive there. If gas is $4 on the mainland, it's $5 there, and that multiplier just goes right on up. But there is a year-round population of about 10,000 or probably more, counting incredibly diverse immigrant populations there, and they kind of have to deal with not just the summer tourist industry, which they are the backbone of, but what happens in this very long and rather dreary and rather isolating off-season where there's not that much to do, and a lot of things close down, and you basically, have your home, you have whatever job you can cobble together, and you have Stop and Shop, and that's kind of it.
Yeah.
And frankly, those were the times when I, tended to visit, for my book, February, November. And I think to be somebody who wants to take on that kind of lifestyle, you have to have a sense of independence. You have to, want to go to a place that's 30 miles out to sea where you cannot always get off the island. So it can be isolating. You're in a very small area. There's a fishbowl mentality. Everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and it takes a special person to kind of to put down roots there and make that their home. And the sort of interesting side of that is that it tends to attract people who are maybe a little bit offbeat.
Well, he's been a little controversial too, and I know you go with that into that in the book. The whole thing about abortions. I mean, he has performed those, and the marijuana cookies. We won't tell the whole story now, but I mean, he has a little controversy about him too, right?
He does, yeah. And those are internal contradictions too, because here he is in what people think of as kind of a bluest of blue states, Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Nantucket itself has a very strong liberal tradition. And Dr. Lepre is he not only listens to Rush Limbaugh, he plays it for his dogs. So he is an NRA member who has a huge gun collection that he keeps protected by tear gas on a tripwire. He's a contrarian, libertarian, conservative. He does not support abortion rights, but he also feels that abortion is legal. Somebody ought to do it. Somebody ought to do it safely. He doesn't think that women who are seeking that service should have to go, all the way off island to get it. And he has, decided to perform them. And it's interesting. Even in Massachusetts, there are actually very few doctors who will perform abortions, and he appears to be the only person between Nantucket and Austin who will do that. And many of the doctors in the area, they had sort of a meeting about this, and none of them would touch it, and he agreed to do it, and that's created controversy not only with sort of the larger island, but several of his nurses are very uncomfortable with it.
Right.
But it's something that he does. Similar with the marijuana cookies. He's not in favor of legalizing marijuana, but he felt that there were some patients, cancer patients, who could use it as a way to ease their symptoms and from chemotherapy. And so he had a guy who was, of course, a patient, who he knew to be somewhat of a stoner. And he said, how'd you like to do some baking for me? And and I spent a wonderful afternoon talking to this guy. It's very difficult to interview. Was indulging at the time.
Most of them are when they're under the influence.
Most of them are. This is true. I want it known. I did not indulge myself.
I'm glad to hear that.
But I did get some cookies to take home.
At least on duty, you didn't do it. That's good.
Right. He takes these stands that contradictory sometimes within his own political views and are controversial, but they do have a logic to them, and they're all sort of driven by what I think really is his overarching goal, which is to help people make it better.
Well, it's a fascinating book, and the name of the book, again, is called Island Practice, all about Dr. Timothy Lepre on Nantucket, and we've been talking with Pam Belluck today. Pam, I wish we had more time, but I really enjoyed reading. I think everybody out there is going to get a kick out of it, because he's kind of a throwback to old-fashioned doctoring. Back in the old days, people don't necessarily have money to pay. He kind of let them slide a little bit, right? And didn't worry about the insurance and all that kind of thing.
Right. If you have, oatmeal raisin cookies, he likes to get paid for those. If you've got a, beat up 44 Magnum you're not using,
he'll take it, huh?
He'll take it till he shoots them all. It's also been kind of interesting because the book happens to be coming out at the time, of course, where there's all this stuff going on with healthcare in America. The Supreme Court is about to rule on the Obama healthcare law, and in a way, Dr. Lepre is, an eccentric version, but still a version of the kind of doctor that patients really want, and the kind of medicine that doctors really want to be able to practice, because he takes time with patients. He doesn't worry about getting paid if he doesn't, if they can't. He gets to know their families and everything about them. He treats the whole patient, and it is the kind of thing that is increasingly hard to do in today's landscape. Yeah.
Do you have a website, Pam? Did we get a hold of the book, or get a hold of you?
Sure. Yeah, you can look up islandpracticebook.com.
Okay.
And also...
all the bookstores, I'm sure, have it. Amazon,
all the bookstores, yeah. And that'll give you... we have links to the reviews have been, fortunately, very, very gratifying. You can see what's there, and there's a way to contact me, and there's a way to buy the book.
Great.
We also have a Facebook page for Island Practice, and...
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Pam. I know being on the health beat with the Times, you got a lot to write about, particularly with the upcoming decision, I suppose, in the Supreme Court with health care and all that. And maybe down the road, if you're available, I'd like to have you back on and talk about that sometime. But congratulations on the book.
Okay, thanks so much. Good to talk to you.